Hello, everyone. I'm Ed Gallagher, President of the American Scandinavian Foundation, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to our program this evening, a lecture by Eliza Reid, the First Lady of Iceland, entitled Secrets of the Sprakkar, and drawn from her recently published book of that same title. This evening's lecture is one of the Curtis L. Carlson Distinguished Lecture series, which are presented regularly here at Scandinavia House, highlighting issues of great importance to both Nordic and American people, and delivered by outstanding leaders of the Nordic societies. And tonight is indeed very good to have Eliza Reid with us. Earlier speakers in this series have included the President of Finland, Matti Ahtisaari, Kofi Annan of the United Nations, Queen Sylvia of Sweden, and Queen Sonja of Norway. It is a real pleasure to welcome Eliza Reid back to Scandinavia House, where she has spoken in the past, most notably in 2018 as a keynote speaker in a special symposium on the future of the Icelandic language. Eliza Reid is a journalist, editor, and co-founder of the annual Iceland Writers' Retreat. A native of Canada, she moved to Iceland in 2003, drawn there by the man who would become her husband and go on to become in 2016 the President of Iceland, Gudni Jóhannesson. Mr. Jóhannesson is, of course, a patron of the ASF and has been here at a number of events. As First Lady of Iceland, Eliza Reid has been an active advocate and promoter of gender equality, entrepreneurship, tourism, and a particular champion of Icelandic writers and the rich literary heritage of Iceland. She has herself written a number of articles, including an op-ed piece for the New York Times, as well as for CNN. Her book, Secrets of the Sprakkar, was published in February to an enthusiastic response. Among the many influential critics and commentators who have praised the book is our own former First Lady and Secretary of State, Hillary Rodham Clinton, who wrote, Secrets of the Sprakkar is a fascinating window into what a more gender-equal world could look like, and why it's worth striving for. Iceland is doing a lot to level the playing field, paid parental leave, affordable childcare, and broad support for gender equality as a core value. Reid takes us on an exploration not only of this fascinating island, but also through the triumph and stumbles of a country as it journeys towards gender equality. It's a great book. I've read it myself. I recommend it highly. It will be available for sale after this lecture, and Ms. Reid will be signing it at a reception on our first floor. So join us up there. But now, please join me in welcoming Eliza Reid.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. What a great pleasure to be back here and to doing an event in person here again. And it's just wonderful to see real life faces, even though it means that I had to dress nicely, not just from the waist up online, but actually the whole thing. So I'm going to do my talk today. It's called Secrets of the Sprakkar. It's based on my book of the same title. The subtitle is Iceland's Extraordinary Women and How They Are Changing the World. The word Sprakkar, well, I think I'll tell you a little bit later what that word means. And you'll find out what their secrets are along the way, but maybe not all of them, because obviously I want you to buy the book at some point when you're done. But before I get too much into the content of the book, I'm going to give you a little bit of a more detailed introduction to me, because there is a strong memoir element to the story as well. So I feel like you need to know my background a little bit for that. I grew up on a hobby farm in Canada, a hobby farm meaning that there were sheep and chickens and ducks and guinea fowl and brothers. And I grew up there, but it wasn't the primary income for my family, but it was rural and in the countryside. And then when I was 18, I went to the University of Toronto to do a degree in international relations. There's supposed to be a cool pic. There we go. There it is coming up. And I think like many people, when I finished that and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, I thought I should continue to procrastinate making adult decisions and go to graduate school. I moved to England to do a master's degree in history and at Oxford. And at Oxford, Canadians were a dime a dozen, and we were not very interesting. But there was, as everybody was talking about, one man from Iceland. And that was considered very exotic. I contrived a date with him, and you can read about that in more detail in the book. But the long and the short of it is that we started dating, we fell in love, we visited Iceland. This is Iceland in the last century when there weren't so many tourists, and this is the glacial lagoon. If anyone has been there now, it's probably not possible to get a photo like this anymore. And in 2003, we moved to Iceland, and I got a job. I started working as a freelance writer, and I co-founded an event called the Iceland Writers Retreat with my friend, Erica Jacobs-Green. And I had this great freelance business. We had 4 kids together in just under 6 years. And if anyone has kids know, it's very hard to get nice photos of them unless you get the moment when they're sitting staring at the television. But this is all of them. You see the one on the right has never held the newest baby before and is nervous about breaking her. And the one who is no longer the young baby is upset that he is no longer the young baby in the photo. And so it goes. And we lived in this cute little 1,000 square foot house in an old part of Reykjavik. And life was great. You know, we were working freelance. My husband was teaching at the university. I drank a lot of coffee because kids, you see. And we had this lovely little life together. And then in 2016, the Panama Papers scandal broke. I detail this also more in the book, but the long and the short of it is that my husband, who is an expert on the presidency of Iceland, ironically enough, and was writing a book on the history of the presidents of Iceland, was called to be the pundit on television when the prime minister of the country was implicated in the Panama Papers scandal. And because there was an ongoing presidential debate, people were really looking out for leading candidates, and they literally started calling our house and encouraging him to run for president. And so he did that in 2016, declared his candidacy at the beginning of May that year, and was elected at the end of June. And so I had the opportunity of serving as First Lady of the country. This is an outfit called the Skautbúningur, which is the most dressy, dressy is not a very formal word, the most formal of Icelandic costumes. It is as complicated to put on as it looks like in that photo. And it took much, much longer to put me into that outfit than it took my husband to wear his clothing for the inauguration. Remember that photo. It's going to come back later in the presentation. It's foreshadowing. Now we're going to go back, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a backgrounder on Iceland. Although, seeing as we're here in Scandinavia House, how many of you have been to Iceland before? Okay, so I can give you a kind of you don't need a basic level on Iceland here, but we always like to see nice pictures. For the purposes of this discussion, a few of the things that you may want to know about Iceland are that we are the most peaceful country in the world. We are the 3rd happiest country in the world, with our Nordic neighbors coming in there first and second. We have one of the longest life expectancies in the world. We are the most welcoming to the LGBTQI community of all the OECD countries. And for the past 12 years, we have been #1 on the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Index, meaning, colloquially, that we are, quote unquote, the best country in the world for women. And that's a photo of me with Vigdís Finnbogadóttir, the world's first democratically elected female head of state, on the occasion of my husband's second inauguration, the inauguration of his second term as president in 2020. Really, this leads to what the book is all about, which is how the extraordinary women of Iceland are changing the world by bringing gender equality within reach. Note that I say within reach because we haven't achieved it yet, and that is very important for us to be mentioning. We still have a long way to go, but we seem to be, at least according to the indices of the World Economic Forum, the closest en route to being able to achieve it. And so during the pandemic, I had this idea of really writing a love letter to Iceland, to my adopted country, of painting a portrait of a nation where we have really passed the tipping point of debating whether or not it's worthwhile trying to achieve gender equality, but how we are going to get there. And I thought what I would do was not write a history of feminism, not write something that was based on all kinds of facts and figures, but really just paint a portrait with this theme to illustrate by sharing women's stories. What is it like to be a mother, a politician, an athlete, a writer, a sex counselor, a comedian, a fisherman, a farmer in the world's best country for women? And so I spoke to almost 40 different women, or Sprakkar, as I call them, which is a very old and obscure Icelandic word that means extraordinary women, for really to share their stories and their secrets of what it's like to live in Iceland, with the idea that hopefully it can inspire people everywhere else, because I tried to choose women who were very relatable. I tried not to pick people who were maybe a spokesperson for something, or Bjork or Vigdis, the first president, people that we think, well, not everybody's going to be Bjork when they're finished, but somebody that we might be able to be inspired by in some way or relate to. And so I'm going to walk you through some of the lessons that I learned from speaking to all of these different women. And it's divided into 3 different sections. I will first talk a little bit about some of the things that we are doing in Iceland that I would call top-down approaches. So those are areas where we have government support or government legislation that is really helping to facilitate greater equality and what that means for people in society. Secondly, I'm going to talk about areas that are really grassroots initiatives that have led to more formalization or changing of society as a whole. And then thirdly, I'm going to talk about individual changes and approaches and attitudes that we can all think about to help make a difference when it comes to gender equality. And then I'm going to bring that back to that photo that you saw at the beginning with the outfit. So here we are. So what are we doing as a society in Iceland to further gender equality? Nobody tell my husband that I put a topless photo of him in the presentation. But this is my husband when he was taking his paternity leave with our second son, attending the infant swimming classes. One of these messages that I have, and each of the chapters in my book, the book is divided into different chapters on society, named after an Icelandic idiom, and features interviews of women talking about that aspect of society. So this talks about this takeaway message, helping parents helps everyone, is obviously in my chapter on parenthood, when I really examine the official sort of government policies that have helped to further equality. And there's 2 key ones there that I think are important. One is the parental leave policy that is paid for by the state and is what's called a use it or lose it scheme, which means that one parent is allocated a number of months leave, a second parent is allocated a number of months leave, and then there's a third number of months that you can kind of share between you. And so the idea being that one parent can't take sole responsibility for looking after the child before it goes into preschool or other systems. And then the second part of that is a heavily subsidized childcare system, an excellent, it's called play school system, which comes in from around the age of 1 up to the 1st grade when the compulsory schooling starts. That's also heavily subsidized and additionally subsidized if you are a single parent or a student or on some kind of disability benefits. And if you're like us, you have your kids very close together, you also get further subsidies again. What this means is that it enables families hopefully to choose the size of the family that they may want to have without necessarily having the financial concerns weigh very heavily on that. It also increases the bonds of, say, fathers with their children, as you can see. In a totally different area, and I spoke about this this morning at the Chamber of Commerce, we have this idea of women in the corporate world. This is a woman called Fida Abu-Libdeh, who is originally from Palestine, moved to Iceland when she was 16, and founded her own company that works with geothermal energy in Iceland. And she's an expert in that field. And we were talking about the challenges and advantages of women in the corporate world in Iceland. When it comes to laws and legislation, Iceland's pretty advanced that it was the first country in the world to mandate that you had to legally prove that you were paying women and men equally, equal pay for equal work, rather than just saying it was supposed to be done, but larger companies actually have to prove it. We also, for about 10 years now, have had a law on gender parity on the boards of publicly traded companies. Again, just trying to accelerate the pace of change when it comes to gender equality. And I talk a little bit about the effectiveness or not, or what else needs to be done in that area. These two photos don't quite tie in. The photo is to do with, is a woman called Unnur Brá Konráðsdóttir, who is a former member of parliament, who, as you can see, is delivering a speech in parliament there as she is nursing her baby. And this, again, was something that got international news attention when it happened. For her, it was the most utterly commonplace thing that you would be doing. But it's another example of a few stories that I tell in the book, how I sort of see the country with an outsider's eyes, that I think many people realize that, in Iceland, this is completely normal, that you would breastfeed your child wherever you are when the child is hungry, but it's not necessarily completely normal elsewhere, and that's why I wanted to highlight it. And the message, "Leave no one behind," is a reminder, really, for us in society as a whole, that gender equality is not something that is for one elite group of people. It's something that is for everybody. It's a human rights issue, and we can't work towards gender equality if we are forgetting women of foreign origin, or women of color, or queer women, or women with disabilities. And I try to encompass that a lot in the book as well, to include their stories and to remember that there's a lot of intersectionality, which I know is it was a term that I didn't use at all when I was writing the book, but a lot of people have referred to the book as incorporating intersectionality into it. And that's the takeaway of these sort of top-down approaches. Well, you can see what it is here, that the legislative framework is important, but it doesn't do everything. It maybe just helps to sort of grease the wheels somewhat. Secondly, then, how can we work from a grassroots approach up to change things in society? And I think the best example that I talk about there in the book is when it comes to the rights, not the queer community overall, but specifically the rights of trans individuals in Iceland. This is Ugla Stefania Kristjánudóttir Jónsdóttir, who is a non-binary trans activist now based in the UK. And they spoke to me really about a lot of the strides that Iceland has made when it comes to enshrining the rights of trans people in law. And I think this is a really excellent example of how societal pressure can really help to shift social norms and also the legal system, or the legislative system within that. So in the 1980s, for example, Iceland was probably as homophobic a country as a great many other countries were. And you can talk about a lot of people or gay activists who fled, say, to Denmark, where they felt that they could lead more authentic lives. And within a relatively short period of time, we have moved, say, having the world's first openly gay head of government. When same-sex marriage was legalized in Iceland, there were no votes against the motion in parliament. And now we're really working when it comes to the rights of trans individuals to enshrine those rights in law as well. And so I speak a lot about that in a chapter on sexuality overall. Here are 4 women in a chapter on the media in Iceland, with this idea of taking up space and having our voices heard. I think so. There's 4 women here who I spoke to together to try to really emphasize different aspects of representation in the media, both how often women are interviewed, what subjects they are interviewed on, how we are talking about women in different subjects, and how we deal with the comment section again. And I think, this is obviously very important because it's really our mirror to the world in some senses, the media. One of the interesting women here is the woman on the right. Her name is Þóra Arnórsdóttir. She's a very well-known television journalist and presenter in Iceland. In 2012, she ran for president of Iceland, which is maybe not all that remarkable, except for the fact that partway through the campaign, she took 2 weeks off to give birth to her 3rd child. And her partner had 3 children from his first relationship. So together as a family unit, it was their 6th child. She took 2 weeks off, had the baby, went back on the stump and campaigned and finished second in the campaign. And she got a lot of attention abroad for it, and did say when I spoke to her for the book that, you know, maybe Iceland was far enough along in equality issues that a heavily pregnant woman could run for president, but nevertheless, she was constantly asked during the campaign, is this right for you? Is this the right time? How do you think you're going to manage it all? And I know when my husband ran for president in 2016, he would do his stump speech and his routine, and he would ask for questions and they'd be finished. And then he would say, isn't someone going to ask me how I can handle it all with the kids? Because I have 5 kids, and if I know I can handle it, but nobody really ever asked him that question, even though they asked Thora that question constantly on the campaign. And she has a wonderful quote that said, people asked her before, are you sure that it's the right time now for you to do this? And she said, so often for women, we spend our lives being told or queried, is it the right time for you now? And all of a sudden you think, well, I'll wait now. I'll wait till I've had kids. I'll wait till the kids are older and they've left home. I'll wait till I've paid off my house. I'll wait till I'm finished my job. And all of a sudden you're really, really old and you've never done or tried whatever it is you wanted to do because somebody else told you that it wasn't the right time for you. And I think that that's something that we all need to examine and take a look at a little bit more. Which leads to this point of always living life with what I call the gender equality glasses, or really the equitability, diversity glasses overall. This is Margrét Lára Viðarsdóttir. She is the highest scorer ever for Iceland's women's national soccer team. She played professional soccer also in Germany and in Sweden, and talked about this immense gulf that exists between male athletes and female athletes when it comes to recognition, certainly pay, facilities, all of this sort of thing. Here's an area where really as a society, Iceland has been pushing so that now and a while ago, the bonuses for national team members are equal for men and for women. And some of the games we try to promote that people go to as many national women's teams games as men's teams games. And it's an interesting example, I thought, where we've really worked to be lowering reducing the chasm between, the divide between men and women, but it's so great. There's still a long way to go. But I have a whole chapter exploring culture and sport in this area and how we as consumers need to be sort of alert with what we're doing. Are we watching? How are we consuming media? How are we listening to music or reading books or watching sports in terms of diversity overall? Because that is kind of our window on the world as well, in addition to the media. This is a message about needing to remain vigilant and continuing to push for changes in laws when we can, but knowing that collectively we can have a very strong difference. And finally, and in a sense, I think most importantly, what we can all do as individuals. One of them is the idea of pushing our comfort zones. I have a message here when I have a chapter on the benefit of female friendships, and I speak to various sort of women's groups there. But this is actually a photo of me in Kakum National Park in Ghana when I went on a backpacking trip in West Africa in 2006. And it's one of these, it's called a canopy walk. So this is like 6 stories high in the jungle, this really narrow kind of wobbly bridge. You walk between the trees and you can see how narrow it is. And I hate heights. And so some people were doing this and they would be jumping to make it be wobblier and have waves more. But I don't know if you can see close enough the photo, but I'm gripping the sides of that bridge, absolutely petrified, inching slowly, very, very cautiously. I'm sure I was always looking down, except for the moment when I'd ask someone who was ahead of me to take a photo of me so I would have it. But I did it. I walked, through these canopy fences, and then I printed out that photo and I wrote on it, "You can do it." And I put it on my office wall. And for a lot of people, this is a teeny tiny thing. It's not scary at all for many people, but it was really scary for me. And I put it up there to remind me that we sometimes need to lean into that uncomfortable feeling about something that we're doing, that it's really important for us to push our comfort zones. And I think especially for women, where we have so often been socialized to make ourselves smaller, to not disagree with somebody, to not try something new, to not apply for that job unless we meet every single one of the qualifications. And this is up there, at least for me, to remind me that, it's always worth trying to do something, and to encourage other people to do that too. This is Halldóra. She was the only woman to graduate with the captain's license in her year at the Mariners School. I can't remember what it's called in English. She was the only woman to graduate with her captain's license. She also incidentally works as a comedian because it's Iceland and we wear a lot of hats. She was very funny to speak to. She became known as the fish whisperer because on the first day when she was going on her boat, the Andri, which is this boat, the other male captains said, oh, no, we never share information about where the fish are. We just go off on our own. And so she said, okay. And she went off in one direction and all the guys went off in the other direction, that they clearly had been talking together to work together. And she caught way more fish. And so after that, she was known as the fish whisperer, and they had to sort of follow her. But I speak to her in a book, and I also speak to a farmer and sheep shearer about the idea that it's so important for us to follow our own dreams and pursue what we want to do, not what maybe society thinks we should be doing. I don't think it can be ever overestimated or underestimated enough, the idea of being role models. That's really my theme for a chapter on politics when I interview a couple of politicians, because I think that is so important. But this photo is another great example. These are the jellyfish. And the jellyfish are a group of women in their 50s who decided that they wanted to raise money for charity by swimming across the English Channel. And to train for this, as you can imagine, is quite arduous. And one dimension of their training was that they went swimming at the Nautilsvík geothermal beach in Reykjavik, nota bene the world's northernmost capital city. And they went swimming in the Atlantic Ocean every week to try to train for the English Channel crossing sea weather. And so, of course, in the name of research, I joined them for a sea swim. I didn't really swim. I ran in and I ducked down and I screamed and swore, and then I ran back out. But I did do it for a moment. And, they were really talking about this idea that they wanted to carve out some space for themselves, that this was really important for them to not only give themselves a strong physical challenge. It's like a 1,000 times more advanced version of me walking on one little bridge once. But also as role models for people in their families and people in the community to say, it's all right for us to prioritize this time with each other. It's all right for us to put these demanding physical challenges in front of us, because a lot of people were saying to them, what does your husband say about this? Or what about the kids? What about the children? And they said, no, this is for us. And I think it's pretty damn good that we're doing this. So these are the jellyfish. And I think that that's a, very important message there. We can't just leave things up to everybody else, or we can't just say, well, we'll get more gender equality if the people we elect will change these laws or do this or that, and be passive about it and assume that it's something that everybody else is going to be doing. We have to really kind of be the change ourselves. And now I'm going to link that back to this picture. Do you remember the picture from the beginning of the talk here? With adding a few other pictures. So if you rewind to 2016 here, and all of a sudden, the mild-mannered, introverted historian from Iceland and his hobby farm-raised foreign wife are serving as head of state and spouse of the country of Iceland. And we were sort of thrust into the national spotlight all of a sudden. And that's quite intimidating. And it's incredible privilege and incredible honor. And I knew that always that I wanted to be active in the role. But I'm such a rule follower by nature. I thought, well, how am I allowed to be active? What am I allowed to do or not do? And, to me, gender equality has always been important. But I thought, well, I can't talk about gender equality because I only have this platform because of something my husband has achieved. There's too much irony in that, or I thought maybe I need to do certain things or not certain things. And then I also found the other way that there were certain expectations on me, that all of a sudden I was known as the wife. I was less known as Eliza, my own person, and I was more commonly known as Glyni's wife. And I'm very proud to be Glyni's wife, of course, but it's a very strange feeling for one's individual identity being sort of added on always in the context of someone else. And along with it came these sort of expectations of what a first lady should look like or act like or see or do. Here are some of the wonderful things that I do get to do in my role as First Lady. I'll highlight the one here in the top right-hand corner. This is during a state visit by the President and First Lady of India. And this is one of the official photos that was circulated afterwards, after which I got a very polite letter from an Icelandic woman who signed her name along with her job title, which was a master tailor. And she said, I think you're doing a great job and I really like you and this visit looked great, but I just wanted to let you know that green is not your color. and so now I try to wear green more. And I shouldn't, it was the politest, most respectful letter, so she was really just trying to save me from myself. But again, it's that strange feeling of what should I be doing? And so I decided I shouldn't worry so much about how I got my platform, but think about what I'm going to do now that I have it. And one of the things that I did was write an op-ed in the New York Times. I didn't write the headline, but it was after this photo was circulated by Donald Tusk at a G7 meeting. These are some of the spouses at the time of G7 leaders. And the photo caption with this image was "the lighter side of the force," as if these women were mere policy muses for their husband's genius. And I thought it just angered me so much how it reduced these women to mere props for their significantly more important spouses, clearly, that I wrote a piece during which I said something like, I'm not my husband's handbag that he can just grab as he runs out the door and display silently by his side at public appearances. And that kind of struck a chord, even though the metaphor is pretty clumsy. So I wrote this piece, and I didn't tell anybody other than my husband that I was going to do it because I didn't want someone to try to talk me out of it. And right before it was coming out, I was really overcome with nervousness and thinking, why on earth did I do this? I'm just gonna have the internet mad at me, and people will say I'm attention seeking, and in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't matter. It's a tiny thing. Stop whining, et cetera, et cetera. But actually, the feedback was really, really positive because maybe not that many people are married to heads of state, but a great many people perhaps have a partner who is better known than they are for whatever reason and could really identify with this idea of what I called sort of the culling of one's identity by 1,000 paper cuts. And that also reminded me, again, to try to push boundaries and lean into that uncomfortable feeling. And I suppose that's my call to action, for lack of a better term, for all of you here, and the message that I want to leave you with from the stories of all of these women that I spoke to, which is to make the most of unexpected opportunity, but to also use your own voices and to try to elevate the voices of those who are around you. Because we are all role models in some way. And it's really up to us whether we want to be positive role models or negative role models. When it comes to something like gender equality, sometimes I think, it's like the climate crisis. It's such a massive issue that it's hard to imagine what we as individuals can do. But hopefully some of the stories of the women in this book and some of the historical stories can inspire people to know that we all can make a difference in our lives and that we really have a responsibility to do that and to remember and to try to make sure that we leave room for everybody's voices as well and to maybe confound expectations a little bit along the way. And I will leave it at that, I think. There we go. So thank you very much. I can answer some questions.
Hi there. I am an educator. I work at a school of business in New Jersey. The majority of my students are women. Mm-hmm. They are working in finance, accounting, management, what normally is directed towards a male-oriented career. So I'm impressed. with what you have, with what you gave us, and it gives me more hope to go back to the classroom and have that voice. I do have a specific question.
Okay.
So in the beginning, you mentioned that obviously we are very lucky because we have a demographic that offers some sort of safe space where you have the resources, you have less corruption, and it seems understandably a good-natured approach. But what are some of the things perhaps that the government of Iceland is doing for the global south in countries where corruption is very high, there are no resources, there's really nearly no safety towards women, towards children. And so how do we collaborate under this platform? Sorry to be so specific.
No, I think that's a great question. And I think, Iceland definitely, the cliche that we say is liking to punch above our weight, takes its international obligations very seriously. It's a founding member of the Istanbul Accords, for instance, against domestic violence, and invests very heavily in development programs in many countries, especially those which are promoting the equality of women and girls. And so, I know, for instance, Sweden would say they have like a feminist foreign policy. I haven't seen Iceland's specifically defined that way, but it absolutely is. And the Prime Minister's office actually has the gender equality portfolio under the Prime Minister's office as well. So it's something that it really has an impact throughout the country's foreign policy and, say, development aid approaches and all of that as well. So, you're absolutely right. Another organization I can mention is UN Women in Iceland. UN Women has a chapter in Iceland, and of all of the national chapters of UN Women that then, contribute to the larger UN Women Fund, UN Women Iceland gives the largest amount of money to that fund in real terms, not per capita terms. So that shows you how important, that organization is for fundraising. And they've done a lot of really inventive campaigns within the country on everything from promoting, men working in traditional female fields to eradicating domestic violence to assisting, refugees and women, in Afghanistan and many places around the world. How difficult was it to learn the language? So my favorite part about that question always is that it's asked in the past tense, as if I woke up and was like, all right, I'm done now, that's fine. Because it's obviously an ongoing process. And it kind of goes in fits and starts, So when I first met my husband, well, he, you can't trust him at all, first of all. I was trying to ask him what different words mean. And I shouldn't say this publicly, but whatever, it'll only be forever on the internet. But I was asking him what the Icelandic word for one vegetable was, and he told me the word for fart. And so you can't trust him at all. So that was one of the first words that I learned in Icelandic. And I thought it was like broccoli or something. And then, of course, I had a CD-ROM, because that's how long ago I was trying to learn the language. And the CD-ROM taught me things like, where is the beach? And you've seen, it's the North Atlantic. And where is the train station? And there are no trains in Iceland. And then I learned keep your seatbelt fastened while seated, because I was flying so much, and it said it in Icelandic on the seat in front of me. And then you just kind of go through phases. So I remember when our children were young, when I was pregnant and I would visit the midwife, you learn a lot of words to do with childbirth and having babies. Then my kids started preschool, and I really remember I learned the words dinosaur and snot. Because those, if you think about it, those are two words that you really don't use very much in conversation unless you have preschool-aged children, and then you use them a lot. And so again, this is just, it goes. And then my husband ran for president, and you learn words like referendum and campaigning and lots of, minority coalition or these kinds of things. So it just depends on what you're doing.
Can you just talk in general terms about adapting to the new lifestyle in that country?
Adapting to the new lifestyle. So I lived in England for 5 years before I moved to Iceland. So I got used to kind of darker winters slightly, and then it got a little darker. And so I was used to being an immigrant, I guess. to a degree. And then I was going to another immigrant when I didn't speak the language. And it's kind of a gradual process as well, I think. One of the advantages I find of being an immigrant is your friendship community tends to be much more diverse than it otherwise would. I think if I had always lived in Canada, my friends would probably mostly be Canadian. But in Iceland, my friends come from all over the world. And that's something that I really enjoy about it. The hardest thing to adjust to is the weather, I found. And remains so to this day, I think.
Actually, one other question. Can you discuss immigration in Iceland?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a whole chapter on immigration in the book. Obviously, it's an issue that's close to my heart. Sometimes people think that Iceland is not a very diverse country, and so I always push back on that because we're actually very diverse, and over 15% of the country is foreign-born now. The percentage of foreign-born people in the U.S., for example, is 10%. So it's higher, although, of course, there's more second, third-generation immigrants in the U.S. But it's really, I think, for the better, changed the makeup of the country. And you do see people come from all different kinds of places, but it's also brought its own challenges, partially because nobody or hardly anyone moves to Iceland speaking the Icelandic language. And so I think as a society, we really need to focus on making it easier and accessible to learn Icelandic. And we need to be adaptable in terms of understanding people speaking imperfect Icelandic and Icelandic with an accent. It's a reason why I try to speak a lot in public, because I do speak imperfect Icelandic with an accent. And sometimes I say fart when I mean broccoli or something. And so I think that's very important. And in when it comes to gender equality in the book, I speak to 3 different women to try to really highlight different unique challenges that women of foreign origin face in the country. One woman I spoke to is from Mexico, lives in a very, very small town in the northeast part of the country, and that she really addresses the idea of living outside of the capital area and the different challenges that brings, and opportunities, of course. Another woman I speak to is originally from Jamaica and is the first woman of foreign origin to get a license to practice law in Iceland, which is not easy when you think about learning, the vocabulary that you need to learn. But she's a woman of color, of course, and so she talks a lot about the sort of microaggressions and racism that exist within the society and how we need to work to tackle that. And then thirdly, I interview a very, middle-class British woman who spent several months living at the women's shelter in Iceland as a survivor of domestic abuse. To really, it was very important to me to talk about gender-based violence and domestic abuse, because unless we eradicate that, we're not going to achieve gender equality. And it was important for me to try to address it in a way that was a little bit different than what expectations might be. So women of foreign origin are disproportionately represented at the women's shelter. But as maybe people don't know, but as we ought to know, of course, this can, anyone can end up in this situation. And so I kind of wanted to profile someone who was maybe not somebody that you would expect. And so she shares her experiences there as well. But as I say in the book, there's no cookie cutter immigrants. So there's 1,000 different immigrant stories.
A couple of years ago, I was just overwhelmed at the number of tourists that were there everywhere. Is this a problem in a sense? It seems really to overwhelm certainly Reykjavik and so forth.
I think this is an excellent question about tourism. Tourism overtook fisheries as the greatest contributor to Iceland's GDP about 6 years ago. Overall, locals' perceptions of tourism is more positive. It's really contributed to the economy. People are proud of the country, want to showcase the country. Tourists themselves have very positive experiences overall. They don't feel usually that it's overcrowded in that sense. Iceland is really going high on the list in terms of number of tourists versus local population. So countries say like Costa Rica or Croatia have very, very high tourist to local population ratios. But I think it's something that the country is really looking to address. And the 2 ways in which the country is mostly doing that are increasing the seasonability of tourism. So, and that's really happened a lot the last number of years, that Iceland is no longer seen so much as a summer destination exclusively, but a year-round destination, so that people are going at all different times of year. And secondly, the idea of really spreading everybody out so that you don't necessarily have to go on the Golden Circle tour. You can go somewhere else in the country, or you can go and spend longer times in certain areas. Still, the majority of people, obviously almost everyone passes through Reykjavik. Although next week I'll be in Akureyri helping to launch a new airline that's flying directly from Akureyri to the continent. But it's the idea is to encourage people to sort of travel to lots of different parts of the country and work really to be responsible and sustainable tourists. So I would say, in short, that it's an important discussion that people are aware of, and I would say that overall we are doing all right with it, but very cognizant of the challenges that it can bring.
Oh, hi. When I think about women in leadership positions on the international stage, in the contemporary, I think of Marine Le Pen, Margaret Thatcher, Golda Meir. Here in the United States, Sarah Palin. This might be a little bit off topic, but I wonder what your thoughts are about women and right-wing populism, the kind of aggressive stance they often take, their persona as being sort of tougher than men. Any thoughts on that? I'd be curious.
I think that we need to see more women in politics overall. It's not my place to comment on where people fall on the political spectrum, what they want to be saying. I think that we need to see an increased diversity of voices wherever that is. I'm interested to see our perceptions as societies of how we are defining and outlining these women. That when we are saying, if we say a woman is very ambitious, we don't always necessarily mean that in a positive way, whereas I think we often do when we talk about men. When we're encouraging women to go into politics or not, women sometimes have to seem that they are being more coy about whether or not they want to say, actually, yes, I do want to do this, and speak up a lot. So I think that, the more, I don't care where they fall on the political spectrum. We want people to be speaking up. And if people feel, that it's interesting, what was the word that you used? Aggressive, was it? To me, I would say that's assertive. And I think people, I think assertiveness is a good thing.
In your book, you talked about the more informal support structures that women have, like the extended families, and how almost everybody in Iceland turns out to be related to each other somehow, and in particular how the women's associations were so important for women's growth and connectedness. If you could talk a little bit more about those more informal structures that we may not know about.
So the women's associations are a group of women that I feature in, again, my chapter on female friendship. And again, as an example of saying, these aren't women who think of themselves as feminist trailblazers. I'm sure they don't think of themselves as feminists at all. They're just women who are kind of living their lives, who've devoted, countless hours to voluntary work within their own communities, and also to support each other. So these women's associations are still active, but maybe increasingly less so. They were very active in the countryside. They would, say, cater funerals, or they would sew clothes for newborn babies, raise money for local charitable causes, but they were also a vital support network for each other in more remote communities when people perhaps lived on farms and needed other sorts of support networks. And so I went to speak to them about the work that they had done, and also, just the support and the importance that showed to each other of kind of women standing together and sticking up for each other, which I think is really vital. Thank you. Tack fyrir.